My name is James W. Shepard. I'm a native Houstonian and executive director of Black Houston Story Incorporated. The mission of Black Houston Story Incorporated is to document, acknowledge, and celebrate 200 years of African Americans' significant contribution and influence on the city of Houston's cultural and historical legacy. Although we have been blessed with the scholarship and dedication of numerous authors of Houston's Black history, there still remain many blank pages to be filled. For example, during my high school years at Cashmere Gardens Senior High School, although I consider my education and teachers there excellent, on the subject of Black history studies, there was almost no discussion and no curriculum. The history taught was United States history, Texas history, highlighted by George Washington, Paul Revere, Sam Houston, the Alamo, and of course, Goliad. Dr. Ira B. Bryan was our principal at Cashmere Gardens at the time and was a noted expert on Black history and Black studies. However, we as students were not provided or allowed study of Dr. Bryan's pioneering Black history research or the books and articles he authored. Due to my desire to learn about the Camp Logan massacre, the Sugarland slave graveyards, and the great personalities in our heritage like John Henry Jack Yates and Patricia Smith Prather, to name only a few, Black Houston Story Incorporated exists to research and communicate the events and personalities which have combined to create the Houston, Texas we know today. We shall produce a documentary entitled Black Houston Story, Fascinating Facts I Bet You Never Knew. The program will be broadcast in October on Houston Media Source Television, hmstv.org, also on Facebook, YouTube, and from our website at blackhoustonstory.org. Your email address will be your only price of admission. The documentary has been funded in part by Humanities Texas, an affiliate of the National Endowment of the Humanities. Our mission is to document, acknowledge, and celebrate 200 years of African Americans' significant contribution and influence on the city of Houston's cultural and historical legacy. I ask your participation in this mission. Visit blackhoustonstory.org for more information on the documentary. Sign up there for our newsletter and like us on Facebook. Thank you. Black Houston Story Incorporated presents Black Houston Story, Fascinating Facts I Bet You Never Knew. To document, acknowledge, and celebrate over 200 years of African American significant contribution and influence on the city of Houston's cultural and historical legacy. This program was made possible in part with a grant from Humanities Texas, the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. This program was also made possible in part with a grant from the Church Without Walls, Houston, Texas, Pastor Ralph D. West, founding pastor. Also made possible by viewers like you. Thank you. The story of Texas and Houston cannot be told without recognition of 500 years of African Americans' impact and contribution to the state's legacy. While Texans continue to work toward equality and justice, African Americans remain an integral part of the larger story of the state of Texas. Texas State Historical Association. The wonderful visions and landmarks of the Houston, Texas we all know would not have been possible without the contributions, skills, intelligence, and community building employed by Houston African Americans. The Black Houston Story is a living tribute to amazing Black Houstonians past and present who excelled in their respective fields in spite of racial hatred, segregation, Jim Crow, to rise and set examples for many of what could be done. The land known as Houston before 1820 was largely inhabited by the Karankawa. They were an indigenous people concentrated in southern Texas along the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. Under the leadership of Stephen F. Austin, the Karankawa were attacked and massacred over time due to Spanish rumors that they were cannibals. By 1891, the Karankawa had been eliminated as a unified tribe. An excerpt from a newspaper of the time: roving bands of Karankawa Indians who fished and hunted on the island in the 1700s called it Snake Island, which was a Spanish translation, Isle de Culebra, due to great numbers of reptiles. This was an area near Galveston, Texas. The Karankawas may be called universal enemies to man. They killed all nations that came in their power and frequently feast on the bodies of their victims. There will be no way of subduing them but extermination. Stephen F. Austin. Excerpt from The Extinct Karankawa Indians of Texas by Shannon Sullivan. In 1823, after two colonists were killed by Coco people, a subgroup of the Karankawa, a Texian militia company of 26 men was formed by Robert Kuykendall. The company attacked the Karankawa village on Skull Creek, killing 19 people and razing homes after stealing their possessions. There was no punishment for the attack, and hostilities continued until free Indians were eliminated from the land. In the beginning, Houston started in Nacogdoches, Texas. Where is Nacogdoches, Texas? Well, according to this map, it is 142 miles north of Houston. In 1832, John Kirby and Augustus Chapman Allen, namesakes of Allen's Landing and Allen Parkway, came from New York to Nacogdoches and paid $5,000 for 6,642 acres of land at the junction of Buffalo and White Oak Bayous. The resultant land deal was named Houston, after General Sam Houston. Although visitors to this town called Houston observed drunkenness, dueling, brawling, prostitution, profanity, and mud-filled streets, the Allen brothers claimed paradise in a Texas newspaper marketing ad. We call the attention of our readers to the advertisement of the town of Houston by Messrs. A.C. and J.K. Allen, who are well known in this country for their persevering enterprise as businessmen. From all we can learn, the location they have selected possesses as many advantages as any other interior town in Texas, on account of the easy access to Galveston and the facility in procuring timber, as well as its central position. This town, no doubt, will be a rival for the present seat of the government of claiming the town of Houston is located at a point on the river which must ever command the trade of the largest and richest portion of Texas. And when the rich lands of the country shall be settled, a trade will flow to it, making it beyond all doubt the great interior commercial emporium of Texas. Extract of a letter from General Sam Houston to a gentleman in the Army. You will learn that I have yielded to the wishes of my friends in allowing my name to be run for president. The crisis requires it, or I would not have yielded. Duty, I hope, would not always require this sacrifice of my repose and quiet. Houston. Site of Sam Houston's house historical marker at 403 Caroline Street, where Sam Houston resided when Houston was capital of Texas from 1836 to 1838. Early day Houston had a reputation as a lawless town, and then had a terrible yellow fever outbreak that killed over 10% of the population. All of this, along with Houston's marshy condition and the inadequate accommodations, caused Houston to lose out in the battle to become the permanent capital of Texas. Excerpts from the Constitution of the State of Texas. The President of the Republic of Texas had a 3-year term and could not serve another consecutive term, which was based on provisions in the Mexican Constitution. The Texas Constitution also protected the right to own slaves and prohibited Indians and Africans from living freely in the country or from becoming Texas citizens.
Slaves who were brought to Texas are to remain slaves of the one who brought them in. Their owner could not free them without the consent of Congress, which may not pass laws that either affect the slave trade or declare emancipation. The head of a family was entitled to one league and labor of land. Every white man, at least 17, was entitled to one third of a league of land. This type of language specifying no citizenship or voting for Indians and Africans has led to real estate and housing segregation in Houston up to today. Barry J. Kaplan, in a 1981 article entitled Race, Income, and Ethnicity, Residential Change in a Houston Community, 1920 to 1970, wrote, Houston is indeed partially planned, but by private developers through large-scale tract development based upon deed restrictions. The most famous of these developments is the elite River Oaks community on Houston's west side, built in the early 1920s by the Hall brothers. This community served as the model for other developments in the embryonic automobile age. But one important restriction, says Mr. Kaplan, applied to all of these communities. The property shall never be sold to any person other than the Caucasian race. With the construction of the CUNY homes in 1940 and Texas Southern University in 1947, there was created a black population concentration in Third Ward, an imminent demand for housing which severely threatened the established order. The final factor was the symbolic Supreme Court decision of 1948, which rendered restrictive covenants non-enforceable in the courts. Deed restrictions barring blacks were common in the various McGregor subdivisions and were the major legal barrier used to protect the communities from black home buyers. Now that the Supreme Court had removed this legal barrier, the intent was to allow Negroes to rent or purchase property without the hindrance of such restrictive covenants. Of course, social pressure, violence, real estate practices, and bank mortgage policy were still viable extra legal devices, but now the legal prop was removed. Though deed restrictions and customs were barriers, fears of black encroachment into white neighborhoods were one reason why Will Hogg, chairman of the Houston Planning Commission in 1929, proposed zoning by race. Due to the failure, however, of the city to pass a comprehensive zoning measure, this proposal was never enacted. The transition of the McGregor area followed the classical succession pattern of penetration, invasion, and consolidation. These are real estate terminologies. This pattern is in effect throughout Houston and many other areas. Reviewing real estate racial deed restrictions is important because even now, in your own real estate deed, this language may still be present and in effect. Delma Catalina Lamonius, a Houston resident, recently found the language in the deed of a house she is trying to buy. It read, property shall not be conveyed to, owned, used, or occupied by any person other than of the white or Caucasian race. This shall be construed to restrict against persons of Indian and Mexican descent. Servants of the white Caucasian race may occupy servant quarters. Houston City Government. With names like McGregor, Hogg, Allen, Finger, Herman, CUNY, and Rice, Houstonians can easily see where their street, park, and institution names were derived. Houston city government has over 500 buildings utilized by over 23,000 city employees. The core of this local government is located in the downtown civic center. This includes City Hall and Annex, the Central Public Library, the Bob Lanier Public Works Building, the Hobby Center, Jones Hall, the Wortham Theater, George R. Brown Convention Center, Tranquility, Sam Houston, and Herman Plaza. Old Market Square, 301 Milam Street has been the center of Houston city government buildings since the Allen brothers founded the city. Each time the old city hall burned down, twice in in 1870 and again in 1901, it was rebuilt. During the latter years of 1890 through early 1900s, the first floor of City Hall was occupied by a fish market. Wishing to establish a more professional atmosphere for City Hall workers and guests, a bond measure in 1927 passed allowing construction of a new City Hall and Civic Center for a combined cost of $2.5 million. In 1929, a report by the City Planning Commission urged the establishment of a civic center, a downtown area of architecturally coordinated buildings and parks. The Planning Commission was chaired by Will C. Hall, son of Texas Governor James Hall and developer of the River Oaks residential area. Prior to the start of the 1929 stock market crash, banks closing, and depression, all of the work on City Hall and the Civic Center were postponed. It was not until October 1937 that Houston City Commissioners Council awarded an architectural contract. In October 1937, the city commissioners awarded the City Hall architectural contract to Joseph Finger. Finger was an Australian-born architect. Not everyone was happy with Finger's selection, including the then Mayor R.H. Fonville and Lawrence Settegast, who sued to block the sale of the City Hall bonds. The bonds were sold after the Texas Supreme Court decided the suit in the city's favor. The city of Houston has a strong mayor-council government. City council members, who also have a three-term limit, are elected from 11 districts in the city, along with 5 at-large council members who represent the entire city, effectively doing away with governance by wards. When the city of Houston was founded in 1836 and incorporated in 1837, its founders, John and Augustus Allen, divided it into political geographic districts called wards. The ward system, a precursor to today's city council districts, was a common political tool of the early 19th century and is still used in some American cities. When the system was at its peak, there were 6 wards, 1 through 6. The wards of Houston are now a cultural and emotional phenomenon rather than a political force. Originally 6 in total, perhaps the 3rd and 5th wards have reaped the most attention and print due to their location, institutions, and famous celebrities of birth. Produced by James W. Shepard and Black Houston Story Incorporated. This program was made possible in part with a grant from Humanities Texas, the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, created with work by Adobe Licensed Stock Photos, Camtasia, Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Spark. www.blackhoustonstory.org. For more information, please visit our website at www.blackhoustonstory.org. Thank you. While African Americans have been subjected to the cruelties of slavery, segregation, and discrimination during the long history of Texas, they have made significant contributions to the growth and development of the state. Following are Houstonians who have excelled in spite of struggle and success, African Americans in Texas. Lauren Anderson. When she was named principal dancer for the Houston Ballet in 1990, Lauren Anderson became the first African American to hold such a position in a major ballet company. Dr. John Biggers, a renowned artist and professor at Texas Southern University, Houston, established the art department at TSU. Jewel Brown was a jazz and blues singer who accomplished many firsts in rising to stardom and in collaboration with great artists. Lee P. Brown, Houston's first police chief and first Black mayor. Ronald Greene, Houston's first African American city controller. L. Franco Lee, Harris County's first African American commissioner. Patricia Smith Prather, African American writer, historian, whose mission is to preserve African American and Texas history every day. May Walker, first female and first African American female constable in Harris County as well as the state of Texas. People, schools, streets, parks, centers. The schools, streets, parks, and centers we lived and walked were tremendous indices of our educational orientation as well as our physiological well being. While a young man, I was unaware or not cognizant of the history and names behind each footstep I took. It is usually the case where objects are named for people who have influence or have made significant contributions to society. Schools, for the thousands of lives entrusted there. Atherton Elementary School. Atherton Elementary School is named for Charles H. Atherton, who became the first principal of the Colored High School, later known as Booker T. Washington High School in Houston, Texas. He held that position for 20 years and is a pioneer educator in Texas. Elementary School. The Bruce School derived its name from Blanche Kelso Bruce of Mississippi. He was a former slave who rose to become a senator from Mississippi. He was appointed Register of the United States Treasury by President James Garfield beginning in 1881. Crawford Elementary School. The suggestion was made by the first principal of this school, built in 1917, that the school be named for Joseph H. Crawford, a professor of science at Prairie View State Normal and Industrial College, now Prairie View A&M University, and a former school district teacher. Dogan Elementary School. Matthew Winifred Dogan was born in 1863 during the Civil War in Mississippi. His education was protracted due to money worries, but he persevered and received his PhD from New Orleans University in 1910. Paul Lawrence Dunbar Elementary School. The school was named for, quote, poet of the Negro race, unquote, Paul Lawrence Dunbar. It was a neighborhood school within easy walking distance for most families. The construction of Interstate 10 in the early 1950s caused the school's closure. Francis Harper Junior High School. School named for abolitionist, temperance advocate, women's rights fighter, author, and poet. She was born in 1825 in Baltimore of free Black parents. Beginning in 1845, she was one of the first African American women to be published in the United States. Henderson Elementary School. School was named for Nathaniel Q. Henderson, who was educator, politician, and civic leader. He was a graduate of Prairie View State Normal School, now Prairie View A&M University, in 1885. His dedication and tenacity in solving problems of Fifth Ward residents earned him the title Mayor of Fifth Ward. Cashmere Gardens Junior Senior High School. Opened in 1957 as a state-of-the-art facility with a strong academic curriculum and the best teachers. It was initially located on 26 acres in Cashmere Gardens on the East Tex Freeway and the North Loop, present-day Kelly Street. Dr. Ira B. Bryant, former principal of Booker T. Washington, was named as principal. Cashmere Alumni Association. Langston Elementary School. The Langston School was named in honor of John M. Langston, who was the first colored man. to graduate from Oberlin College in Ohio and who spent a long, useful life occupying many positions of honor and trust with the greatest satisfaction. The Red Book of Houston, page 14. Ryan Colored Junior High School. After Yates High School relocated from 2610 Elgin to 3703 Sampson in 1958, Ryan Colored Junior High School opened in Yates' former location. Ryan was named after the first principal of Yates High School. Some older maps refer to the school as Yates Junior High School. Many professionals in the Third Ward community attended Ryan. Emmett J. Scott Elementary School. School is named for Mr. Emmett J. Scott, who is a product of Wiley University and best known as the executive secretary of the Tuskegee Institute and the strong right hand of Dr. Booker T. Washington. The Red Book of Houston, page 11. E.O. Smith Junior High School. Ernest Arlington Smith, educator and civic leader, was born on July 4, 1885, in Selma, Alabama. Smith's father, William Smith, helped build Fisk University after the Civil War. The E.O. Smith Junior High School, located in the Fifth Ward community of Houston, was named in his honor in 1950. Texas State Historical Society. Booker T. Washington High School. The school was established in 1893 in Houston's Fourth Ward as Colored High. The first location for the school, 303 West Dallas, is considered to be within downtown Houston as of 2007. In 1928, it was renamed Booker T. Washington High School. It relocated to its present day location in Independence Heights in 1959. Phyllis Wheatley High School. Phyllis Wheatley High School is named after Phyllis Wheatley Peters, name also spelled Phyllis and Wheatley, was the first African American author of a published book of poetry. Born in West Africa, she was sold into slavery at the age of 7 or 8 and transported to North America, where she was bought by the Wheatley family of Boston. On January 27, 1958, history was made by a philanthropic endeavor in the Sunnyside area of Houston, Texas. A wealthy benefactor, Evan Edward Worthing, bequeathed that all of his wealth be returned to the Negroes. Because of his philanthropic request, Evan E. Worthing's Junior Senior High School became a reality in this community. Jack Yates High School. Jack Yates Senior High School is a public high school located very near Texas Southern University in the historic Third Ward section of Houston. Yates was named after Reverend John Henry Jack Yates, a former slave from Gloucester County, Virginia, and founder who became pastor of the historic Antioch Baptist Church in 1868.
Hello, my name is James W. Shepard. I am a native Houstonian and executive director of Black Houston Story Incorporated. Motivated by a goal to possess land in Houston to celebrate the anniversary of their emancipation, 4 former slaves formalized the idea and collaborated to purchase 10 acres of land in 1872 for $1,000. Led by Reverend Jack Yates, Reverend Elias Dibble, Richard Brock, and Richard Allen, Emancipation Park in Houston, Texas, stands as a renewable example of property ownership and a firm location for facility construction and celebration. After the Emancipation Park Conservancy was formed as a 501c3 organization, there has been steady improvement in facilities, amenities, and personnel to continue its mission of turning their backs on slavery and their faces to the future. Find out more about Emancipation Park and Black Houston Story Incorporated by visiting our website at blackhoustonstory.org. Sign up there for our newsletter and like us on Facebook. Thank you.
Blodgett Avenue. The old Chocolate Bayou Road became Blodgett Avenue in the 1930s, 1940s timeframe. According to the Railroad Commission of Texas records, Tower 12 was located at Blodgett. It appears that RCT simply listed the tower as being located at Blodgett because it was near the intersection of South Main and Blodgett Street, south of downtown Houston. Dowling Street. Richard Dick Dowling was a businessman and Confederate commander in the Civil War who prevented a Union military force of more than 5,000 men, 22 transport vessels, and 4 gunboats from occupying Sabine Pass, the starting place for a large invasion that would soon have given the Union control of Texas. Dowling Street was renamed Emancipation Avenue in 2017. Elgin Street. The city of Elgin, Texas, was created by the Houston and Texas Central Railroad on August 18, 1872, and named for Robert Morris Elgin, the railroad's land commissioner, following the practice of naming new railroad towns after officers of the company. Elgin Street in Houston, Texas, was also named after him. Ennis Street, named for Cornelius Ennis, who was a blockade runner for the Confederacy. Ennis Street is another thoroughfare surrounding the western edge of Texas Southern University in Houston. Gregg Street, named for former slave Reverend Toby Gregg, who founded the Mount Vernon United Methodist Church in 1865, which was the oldest institution in the Fifth Ward at that time. George Herman gave the city of Houston 385 acres for the Grand Municipal Park. During a ceremony celebrating the park in May 1914, Herman said, "This is the happiest day of my life. I thank God that I am able to do this." Herman also donated a charity hospital to the city, now Memorial Hermann Texas Medical Center. Claudia Feldman, Houston Chronicle, May 19, 2016. Jensen Drive, one of the major historical thoroughfares of Houston's Fifth Ward. Portions of Jensen Drive was once Clark Street. The corner of Jensen Drive and Lyons Avenue was once the Black Business Center of Fifth Ward. Liberty Road. Liberty Road is a Fifth Ward thoroughfare that still upholds its share of traffic. It was gateway to the Southern Pacific train and freight yard at Lockwood Drive. Traffic was once heavy with commercial vehicles and shift workers for Southern Pacific. Lyons Avenue. Originally, Lyons Avenue was named Odin Avenue for John Mary Odin, the first Catholic bishop of the diocese. The Lyons family owned saloons and grocery stores along Odin Avenue during the 20s, and in 1927, Odin was changed to Lyons in honor of saloon magnate John Lyons. Google. McGregor Way. McGregor Park on the banks of Brays Bayou was established in the 1920s thanks to the foresight of Houston businessman Henry F. McGregor and the generosity of his family, which, after his death in 1923, gave the land and funds to the city to establish the park, as well as naming the roads surrounding the park. Fairchild Harwell McDougall, July 2014, Houston History Magazine. Milam and Fannin. Named after leading figures in the Texas Revolution, James Walker Fannin, Army leader who died at the Battle of Goliad, and Benjamin Milam, led at the Siege of Bear, who was also killed in the battle. Houston Chronicle. City Gas Subdivision. City gas was first developed in 1892 by German immigrants William J. and Julius J. Settigast. Settigast was settled by African Americans seeking land in the northeast side of Houston. The city of Houston annexed Settigast in 1949 and began providing sewer trunk lines in 1965. Wikipedia. T.C. Jester Boulevard. Named after Thomas C. Jester, the revered pastor of Baptist Temple in the Heights from 1927 until his death at age 65 of a heart attack. Wikipedia. West Dallas Street. The first freed slaves departed the Brazos River cotton plantations in 1866 and entered Houston via San Felipe Road, now named West Dallas, in the portion from downtown Houston to Shepherd Drive. The slaves settled on the Buffalo Bayou's southern edge, creating Freedmanstown and constructing small shanties as houses. Antioch Missionary Baptist Church came soon after. Westheimer Road, namesake of Michael Louis Westheimer, a German entrepreneur who arrived in Houston in 1859 and operated many businesses, including a flour mill. Heather Layton, Houston Chronicle, April 30th, 2017, updated March 18, 2020.
Hello, my name is James W. Shepard. I am a native Houstonian and executive director of Black Houston Story Incorporated. From 1939 to 1970, the El Dorado Ballroom in Houston, Texas, represented one of the finest live performance venues in the state of Texas. Located at the corner of Elgin and Emancipation Avenue, the El Dorado was the obvious choice for live blues and jazz performances for those able to afford an affluent lifestyle. A large dance floor, a house orchestra, and large parking lot attracted major touring acts like Ray Charles, Etta James, Lightning Hopkins, Bill Doggett, Jimmy Reed, and T-Bone Walker, to name a few. The Eldorado was a musical and performing training ground also for some like Eddie Cleanhead Vincent, Don Wilkerson, and Conrad Johnson, the professor. By 1970, the changing area dynamics and demographics contributed to the ballroom's decline. Anna and Clarence Dupree created one of the most celebrated musical communities in Texas. Find out more about the El Dorado Ballroom and Black Houston Story Incorporated by visiting our website at blackhoustonstory.org. Sign up there for our newsletter and like us on Facebook. Thank you.
Decades ago, the federal government, the city of Houston, and the state of Texas colluded to create a system of racially segregated, subsidized housing. Today, those government officials and private developers maintain that system through affordable housing development programs. Allen Parkway Village. The largest public housing project built in Houston in the early 1940s was San Felipe Courts, now Allen Parkway Village. Black land and business owners were displaced to make way for the project. To appease possible civil unrest, blacks were assured by political movers and shakers that they would be allowed to partake in the new housing once construction was complete. However, in order to justify funding during World War II, the project was designated as part of the war effort to serve military families. A brick wall was erected instead to separate the courts from the remaining freedmen's town. Only whites were allowed to be housed in the courts. It was not until 1968 that the first blacks were permitted to reside there. The Houston mayors during this period of construction was Cornelius Augustus Pickett, Otis Massey, and Oscar F. Holcomb. All were pro-business and tethered to the financial, real estate, and or lumber industries. In 1951, when Mayor Oscar Holcomb asked the voters of Houston to approve the construction of 5,000 more units of public housing, a bitter battle ensued, with opposition coming from the lumber, builders, and savings and loan lobbies, as well as groups that opposed public housing for ideological reasons. The voters' rejection of Holcomb's funding proposal effectively put the brakes on the Housing Authority of the City of Houston, HACH. The fifth public housing complex, Clayton Homes, located near the foot of Navigation Boulevard, was in the planning stages prior to Holcomb's referendum. It was completed in 1952 only because philanthropist Susan Vaughan Clayton donated the land. In 1953, Irvin W. Blum, executive director of HACH for the previous 10 years, was convicted of extorting bribes in connection with awarding construction contracts for Clayton Homes. Wikipedia. Blum's trial revealed that the HACH Board of Commissioners had been derelict in exercising oversight and that federally funded programs to benefit low income residents at San Felipe Corps were suppressed so that the HACH staff could use the funds and property for personal purposes. Curtis Lang, A Depleted Legacy of Public Housing in Houston, 1995. In other words, nothing had changed at HACH since the 1952 scandal. A succession of Houston mayors had failed to administer HACH in a responsible manner, allowing millions of dollars to disappear without a trace. Neither taxpayers nor public housing residents have benefited from this type of public housing authority. Curtis Lang, A Depleted Legacy, Public Housing in Houston, 1995. Clayton Homes. Susan Vaughan Clayton donated property which houses Clayton Homes to the city of Houston, and it opened in 1952. Most of the new residents were Hispanic, had large families, and were of low income statuses. About 2,500 families of Mexican origin resided in Clayton Homes in the late 1950s. Wikipedia. Almost 40% of the units were flooded by Hurricane Harvey in 2017. Tenants reported that their landlord asked them for rent even though their rooms were flooded, but the Houston Housing Authority later refunded the rent. Of the HHA complexes affected by Harvey, Clayton received the most damage. Wikipedia. The HHA deemed the flooded apartments infested with mold and E. coli a total loss and had them demolished, and they would not be rebuilt as Interstate 45 was expanded. The entirety of Clayton Homes will be demolished in the future. Between 1952 and 2000, the predominantly Hispanic children of Clayton Homes had been zoned and rezoned to at least 9 different schools or educational centers. CUNY Homes, the 553-unit housing project named for Norris Wright CUNY, a black politician born to an enslaved mother and a white planter, lies along Alabama Street, once the line separating black neighborhoods from white ones in Third Ward. Black domestics and drivers could cross the divide to work for white, predominantly Jewish families, but had to return to their side of town by sundown. Tracy James. During the period from 1940 to 1944, HACH built 2,215 racially segregated public housing units. For Black residents, HACH opened CUNY Homes in Third Ward across from the future site of Texas Southern University in 1940 and Kelly Courts in Fifth Ward in 1941. For white residents, it built Irvington Courts, also in Fifth Ward in 1942. In 1940, CUNY Homes, a public housing development of 564 units for low-income blacks, was constructed just north of Blodgett and east of the HB&T Railroad on the southern rim of the Third Ward and separated from Washington Terrace by the railroad that acted as an edge between the two districts. Washington Terrace was designed to eliminate undesirable characters and features. Barry Kaplan. Located just north of downtown Houston, Irvington Village is one of the first properties acquired by the Housing Authority. The apartment complex is being modernized in phases and now features a new community building. The development is also adjacent to a park and part of a culturally diverse neighborhood with businesses that offer a broad range of activities and experiences for residents. Irvington Courts Village was built as a whites only housing project in 1942. Kelly Courts. The Kelly Courts public housing community in Houston's Fifth Ward, called Kelly Village since 1965, was named for Alex K. Kelly, 1847 to 1928. Born enslaved in Brazoria County and an employee of the Southern Pacific Railway and its affiliates for much of his working life, Kelly also built and operated rental housing in Houston's Fifth Ward. Every apartment occupied the full depth of the structure, so the two-story units had both front and back doors. The building's thinness facilitated cross ventilation in Houston's hot, humid climate. The end units were stacked, one floor, one bedroom apartments. Interior partitions were hollow, tile block, or plaster on metal lay. Exterior walls were faced with dark red brick. Stephen Fox. Government subsidized housing in Houston today is confined exclusively to low income neighborhoods of color. Richard Rothstein, Economic Policy Institute. Today's residential segregation in the North, South, Midwest, and West is not the unintended consequence of individual choices and of otherwise well meaning law or regulation, but of unhidden public policy that explicitly segregated every metropolitan area in the United States. The policy was so systematic and forceful that its effects endure to the present time. Without our government's purposeful imposition of racial segregation, the other causes, private prejudice, white flight, real estate steering, bank redlining, income differences, and self segregation still would have existed, but with far less opportunity for expression. Richard Rothstein. The number of persons from Houston, Texas, rising to achieve success no matter the housing conditions of their parents is a testament to their persistence and determination and a call to your future action. According to Calvin Coolidge, our 30th U.S. president, these two attributes are omnipotent. Parks. Our Barbara Jordan Park is named after the former U.S. Representative and State Senator. Barbara Jordan grew up in Houston's Fifth Ward and was a tireless advocate for her community, rising to the top of her field by breaking down racial and gender barriers. The Barbara Jordan Park is a great place to get active. Dewson Park. Dewson Park is named after petroleum geologist Alexander Dewson. Alexander Dewson donated a 309-acre site on Lake Houston to Harris County in 1956, and the site was converted into a public park. El Franco Lee Park. Named after the late Harris County Commissioner L. Franco Lee, who served as Precinct 1 Commissioner for 30 years. This large park has sport fields, picnic areas, playgrounds, and a splash park for the summer. The park is the perfect place to go for nature enthusiasts with bird watching, a butterfly garden, and a nature trail. Emancipation Park. Sparked by the desire to have a place to commemorate the anniversary of their emancipation, Juneteenth, community members, all former slaves in the third and fourth wards, led by Reverend Jack Yates, Richard Allen, Richard Brock, and Reverend Elias Dibble, united to raise $1,000 in 1872 to purchase 10 acres of park land. Finnegan Park. Finnegan Park was named after Annette Finnegan, suffragist and art patron who donated approximately 18 acres of land in the early 1900s for use as a park in Fifth Ward, primarily intending it to benefit Black residents. Herman Park. George Herman Park is a 445-acre urban park in Houston, Texas, situated at the southern end of the Museum District. The park is located immediately north of the Texas Medical Center. Located in the heart of Houston, Herman Park welcomes an estimated 6 million visitors a year. Julius C. Hester House. The organization is named after Julius C. Hester, 1881 to 1940, a teacher who opened her home to neighborhood youth. She and her husband, A.Z. Hester, were leaders in the Fifth Ward community and, although having no children of their own, provided a safe place for all children in the community. Juneteenth Park. Juneteenth Park will memorialize June 19, 1865, the day Texas slaves learned of their freedom over 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. Juneteenth celebrations led Texas and other states to declare it a state holiday. As we celebrate, we should also acknowledge that the fight for absolute equality continues along with the work to remove the vestiges of racism. Mickey Leland Memorial Park. Dedicated to the public to honor the late congressman on November 10, 2000, the memorial is located in northeast Houston on the site of the first office occupied by Leland after he was elected to the Texas state legislature in 1972. Swaney Park. The 2.5-acre park at 2812 Klein, built in 1968, serves more than 6,000 households and 9,000 housing units, mostly in the Kennedy Place and Kelly Village housing projects. Swanee Park houses a community center, multi-use pavilion, playground, practice ball field, and picnic area. Sylvester Turner Park. The family-oriented park is named for Sylvester Turner. He is an American attorney, politician, and is the 62nd mayor of Houston, Texas. A member of the Democratic Party, Turner was also a member of the Texas House of Representatives from 1989 until 2016. He attended the University of Houston and Harvard Law School. Tuffley Park. Named for Louis J. Tuffley, who owned a bar or saloon in downtown Houston in the old Capitol Hotel, Rice Hotel. In the late 19th century, Lewis was elected to the Houston City Council and served as mayor pro tem.
This historic African American library is housed in the Edgar M. Gregory School. It was the first public school for African Americans built in 1926. According to the library's website, the Gregory School serves as a resource to preserve, promote, and celebrate the rich history and culture of African Americans in Houston. From digital archives to oral histories to high school sports, the African American Library at the Gregory School is your place to be. Find out more about the African American Library at the Gregory School and Black Houston Story Incorporated by visiting our website at blackhoustonstory.org. Sign up there for our newsletter and like us on Facebook. Thank you.